What if China's most unreal mountains were not simply shaped by stone, but by vanished volcanoes, sacred teachings, ancient Laoshan, and forests that still conceal worlds unknown to science? In this journey, we leave the familiar cities behind and enter mountain landscapes where Buddhist philosophy was transformed, Taoist immortals were sought beside the sea, and red cliffs rise like the ruins of forgotten fortresses. Across 10 extraordinary destinations, we will follow waterfalls into silent temples, cross volcanic valleys, pass between granite figures, and discover how millions of years of erosion created places that seem designed by imagination rather than geology. Stay with us until the final mountain, and tell us which of these hidden landscapes deserves an entire documentary of its own. Tiantai, Mountain Zhejiang. Tiantai Mountain rises through the forests of Zhejiang in a world of waterfalls, mist-filled valleys, ancient paths, and quiet temple roofs. Yet, its greatest legacy is not a single view, but the transformation of Buddhism into a distinctly Chinese spiritual tradition. The central story begins with the teachings associated with Master Wuyi, whose efforts organized Buddhist scriptures and meditation practices into the Tiantai school, creating a system that later influenced religious communities far beyond the mountain itself. At Guoqing Temple, regarded as the ancestral center of the tradition, courtyards and halls stand within a landscape where running water, forest, silence, and changing light seem to provide a natural rhythm for contemplation. The mountain did not merely offer a remote place for monks to hide from society, because its isolation created the time and mental space required to compare teachings, resolve contradictions, and develop a more unified spiritual philosophy. Waterfalls repeatedly appear and disappear behind vegetation, turning movement into a lesson of impermanence while the temple remains below, suggesting that stability can exist without resisting the constant transformation of the world around it. Tiantai therefore represents a rare moment when geography helped reshape belief, proving that a quiet mountain could influence how millions of people understood meditation, compassion, and the possibility of awakening. Would you come to Tiantai for its waterfalls, its silence, or the chance to stand where a new form of Buddhism took shape? Mount Laoshan Shandong. Mount Laoshan rises directly beside the Yellow Sea, where granite slopes, caves, temples, and clear springs face an open horizon that made the mountain appear to ancient seekers like a boundary between the human world and the realm of immortals. The defining story here is the pursuit of eternal life, because generations of Taoist practitioners believed that isolation, disciplined living, medicinal plants, and pure mountain water could bring the body closer to harmony with the natural order. Springs flowing from the rocks became especially important, since their clarity and mineral character encouraged stories of sacred water capable of preserving health, extending life, or revealing knowledge unavailable in the cities below. At temples such as Taiching Palace, the sound of waves reaches pathways traditionally associated with meditation and internal alchemy, allowing the sea and mountain to function together as one enormous spiritual laboratory. Legends later transformed the mountain's Taoist masters into mysterious figures who could disappear, pass through barriers, or expose the arrogance of students seeking supernatural power without first developing patience and moral discipline. Laoshan remains compelling because the true secret of its immortality stories may not be a magical spring, but a philosophy teaching that longer life means little unless a person first learns how to live in balance. Would you taste the mountain water for its minerals, its legends, or the small possibility that the old stories were right? Mount Hengshan, Hunan. Mount Hengshan, traditionally known as Nanyu or the Southern Sacred Mountain, rises above Hunan as a religious landscape where Buddhist monasteries, Taoist shrines, Confucian ideas, and folk worship developed along the same paths instead of claiming separate mountains. The central story is coexistence, because generations of pilgrims arrived with different beliefs, yet accepted the mountain as a shared source of order, blessing, reflection, and moral responsibility. Near its base, the vast Nanyu Temple complex contains architectural spaces connected with imperial ceremony, Taoism, Buddhism, and local ancestral traditions, turning one enclosure into a physical map of China's overlapping spiritual worlds. Higher on the slopes, temples and paths continue that conversation, allowing one traveler to pray for compassion, another to seek harmony with nature, and another to reflect on duty without requiring any of them to erase the others. This arrangement was not created by pretending that all teachings were identical, but by recognizing that different traditions could address different human needs while remaining rooted in the same mountains, seasons, and communities. Hengshan, therefore, reveals a form of cultural strength based not on uniformity but accommodation, showing how one sacred landscape could hold multiple truths without forcing them into a single voice. Which path would you follow first at Hengshan, the Buddhist temple, the Taoist shrine, or the road shared by both? Baishi Mountain, Hebei. Baishi Mountain rises from northern Hebei like a pale stone fortress with sharp towers, vertical walls, narrow ridges, and deep valleys, creating a landscape that appears more like the defensive architecture of a vanished civilization than an ordinary mountain range. The central story is the creation of its white marble peak forest, a rare geological structure formed after ancient carbonate rock was altered, uplifted, fractured, and exposed to prolonged erosion. Deep vertical joints divided the mountain into enormous blocks, while water, frost, gravity, and weather gradually widened those weaknesses until separate pillars and blade-like walls emerged above a more stable granite foundation. The resulting formations stand unusually close together, creating natural corridors and enclosed spaces where cloud can collect between the towers and temporarily hide entire sections of the mountain. From a distant viewpoint, the pale cliffs resemble a single massive wall, but walking among them reveals that the apparent fortress is actually a fragile arrangement of separated stone bodies constantly being reshaped by wind and gravity. Baishi demonstrates that nature can imitate architecture without intention, producing battlements, towers, gateways, and defensive walls through nothing more than pressure, fracture, exposure, and time. Would you explore Baishi as a mountain, or as the abandoned fortress it seems determined to resemble? Yandang Mountains, Zhejiang. The Yandang Mountains appear as a chaotic collection of stone blades, isolated peaks, waterfalls, caves, and deep valleys, but beneath this visual disorder lies the remains of an ancient volcanic system shaped during the Cretaceous period. The central story is the afterlife of a caldera, because eruptions once filled this region with rhyolitic lava, volcanic ash, and fractured rock before collapse and erosion began dismantling the original volcanic structure. Over immense periods of time, water followed cracks through the hardened deposits, cutting narrow valleys and exposing resistant sections that remained standing as towers while weaker material was carried away. Waterfalls now descend over the edges of this volcanic architecture, temporarily tracing the same weaknesses that erosion has followed for millions of years, and making the mountain's geological history visible through moving water. Some peaks change appearance dramatically with the viewing angle or fading light, which explains why Yandang has long inspired stories in which rocks seem to transform into animals, figures, or supernatural guardians after sunset. Yandang is therefore not merely an extinct volcanic landscape, but a monument to what happens after the fire disappears and water receives millions of years to rewrite everything the eruption created. Which force feels more powerful here, the volcano that built the mountains or the water that slowly took them apart? Mount Sanqingshan, Jiangxi. Mount Sanqingshan rises from Jiangxi as a concentrated world of fantastically shaped granite, where dozens of peaks and pillars emerge above forest and cloud, like monumental figures gathered for a ceremony no human being was meant to witness. The central story is how geology became Taoist imagery because the mountain's three principal summits were associated with the three pure ones, among the highest divine figures in the Taoist tradition. Across the wider landscape, granite pillars resemble human profiles, animals, serpents, robed figures, and guardians, encouraging generations of visitors to interpret erosion not as random destruction, but as a form of natural symbolism. These shapes developed as fractures, divided the granite, and weather attacked the exposed surfaces, gradually removing weaker material while leaving narrow towers balanced above steep valleys. Cloud, rain, and shifting sunlight continually alter the silhouettes, allowing the same formation to appear protective at one moment, threatening at another, and almost invisible when mist fills the spaces between the stone. Sanqingshan's mystery lies in this partnership between rock and imagination, because geology created the pillars, but human belief transformed them into a sacred assembly standing above the ordinary world. Which figure would you search for? First, the ancient guardian, the stone serpent, or the three pure ones hidden among the peaks? Jianglang Mountain, Zhejiang. Jianglang Mountain is dominated by three colossal red stone pillars rising side by side above green countryside, forming a geological monument so isolated and vertical that it appears to have been placed there rather than uncovered by erosion. The central story is separation, because the three towers were once connected within a larger mass of sedimentary rock before fractures, vata, and weather gradually removed the weaker material surrounding them. As erosion deepened the gaps, the single mountain body became three individual columns, each preserving the horizontal layers of ancient sediment while standing hundreds of feet above the land below. Their nearly vertical faces create narrow passages where sunlight enters for only limited periods, making the space between the pillars feel less like an open mountain trail and more like a corridor cut through a gigantic, ruined wall. Seen from far away, the three formations appear balanced and permanent, yet their existence is evidence of continuous loss, since everything visible today is what remained after an enormous volume of rock disappeared. Jianglang therefore turns erosion into a paradox. The mountain's most recognizable identity was created not by what nature added, but by everything wind, rain, and gravity successfully removed. Do the three pillars look like natural towers to you? or the surviving gates of something much larger? Mount Wuyi, Fujian. Mount Wuyi is shaped by red sandstone cliffs and the winding Nine Bend River, but its most influential legacy may be something small enough to hold in one hand: tea, grown within the mountain's humid valleys and rocky slopes. The central story is how landscape became flavor because soil, mist, drainage, trade, and temperature created conditions in which tea plants developed distinctive qualities that could not be separated from the cliffs surrounding them. Cultivation here became closely connected with rock tea traditions, where leaves grown among weathered stone were processed through carefully controlled stages that transformed mountain vegetation into a product valued far beyond Fujian. From the 11th through the 16th centuries, an imperial tea farm operated in the region, revealing how a remote mountain crop became part of court ceremony, taxation, trade, and political prestige. The river and cliffs protected pockets of cultivation, while also limiting available land, forcing growers to understand small variations in sunlight, elevation, moisture, and rock with extraordinary precision. Wuyi demonstrates that a mountain does not need to be carved into a temple to enter civilization, because its geology can be carried outward through taste, ritual, memory, and a single cup of tea. Would you remember Wuyi more clearly through its red cliffs, its winding river, or the taste of tea grown between them? Shennongjia, Hubei. Shennongjia spreads across central China as an immense staircase of forest, rising from lower subtropical vegetation into cold highland ridges where fog, temperature, and elevation divide the landscape into distinct ecological worlds. The central story is vertical survival, because animals and plants, living only a short horizontal distance apart, may experience completely different climates depending on their position along the mountain slopes. Evergreen forest gives way to mixed woodland, deciduous trees, conifers, and finally, high meadows and scrub, forming an unusually complete sequence of vegetation zones protected across a dramatic range of elevation. This layered environment shelters rare and endemic species, including the golden snub-nosed monkey, whose survival depends on forest connections that allow groups to move with changing food, snow, and seasonal temperature. Dense mist and rugged valleys helped preserve areas of primary forest by making access difficult, allowing ecological relationships to continue in places where large-scale human transformation remained limited. Shennongjia feels mysterious, not because science has failed to study it, but because every climb reveals another climate, another forest, and another biological world hidden directly above the one below. Would you enter Shenongjia, searching for rare wildlife, ancien forest, or the next ecosystem waiting above the clouds? Langshan Hunan. Langshan rises through southern Hunan in enormous red walls, rounded towers, narrow gorges, caves, and isolated stone masses that together form one of the most dramatic sections of China's vast Danxia landscape. The central story is erosion becoming a maze because thick deposits of red sedimentary rock were uplifted and fractured before water began cutting passages between the blocks. Rain followed vertical joints, streams deepened the lower valleys, and gravity removed unstable sections, gradually creating corridors so narrow that the surrounding cliffs can block direct sunlight for much of the day. Outside those passages, massive red formations stand above green vegetation with smooth faces and exaggerated profiles, encouraging local legends to treat them as animals, warriors, guardians, or figures frozen during moments of supernatural conflict. The contrast between open towers and compressed gorges makes the landscape psychologically unpredictable, shifting within a short walk from wide panoramic views to spaces where stone closes in from both sides. Langshan reveals the full theatrical power of Danxia geology, showing how one family of red rock can become a fortress, a labyrinth, a collection of statues, and an archive of stories without changing its basic material. Subscribe for the next journey and tell us which Langshan path you would choose, the open ridge or the shadowed gorge.